Hey everyone, and welcome to our post not E3 / Summer Game Fest Ask Shane Anything episode. However, you guys didn't really ask any questions about not E3. In fact, you guys hadn't asked any questions at all. I had to go on Twitter and ask for questions, and we do have at least one question in today's episode from Twitter. I do realize we're not doing this show quite as often anymore, and maybe that's kept you guys from going and asking questions, but we need them, folks. Just go to the header at sifted.net. There's a link there to go to our forums and ask questions. I was really disappointed to find out no one had gone and asked any not E3 questions. All the stuff that happened, you guys don't have any questions. I'm kind of surprised. So I went on Twitter and got at least one question about it. Now, again, this show is a reward for people who are pledging at that $7 or more per month at that Ask Shane Anything tier. If you guys had jumped in there and asked a question about not E3, your question would have been in the show because I prioritize you guys. But nope, nothing, crickets. So I had to do the best with what I had. Again, I do realize this show is a little more sporadic as well now. It's kind of hard for you guys to figure out when we're going to do it, but that doesn't mean you can't go ask questions. So go right over there now, or actually wait till the show's over and ask some questions. I'm not 100% sure we'll be doing one next week, but definitely probably the week after we'll do another episode of Ask Shane Anything. And again, thanks to everybody who is pledging at that higher tier. Without that, this show simply would not happen. Let's get to it. Okay, our first question for this episode is about E3, and I got it from Twitter, and it comes from Dan McBride. With Microsoft putting a real emphasis on Game Pass throughout its not E3 2024 showcase, it looks like it's still all in. What do you think its expectations are for subscriber growth? How long will it stick with the Game Pass strategy if those expectations aren't met? Okay, well, Pachter kind of answered some of this stuff in a recent episode of Pachter Factor. The question that was posed to him was, what will the impact of Call of Duty be on Game Pass? And I think he said that he expected around 3 million people to be added before the end of the year, thanks to just Call of Duty on its own. Now, I think maybe wasn't factored into that is this awesome not E3 showcase that Microsoft just did. I have a feeling if Pachter had seen that before that question was asked, he would factor in all those other games that we just saw, because a lot of them are coming in 2025, or a few of them even coming this year. And that should impact the subscriber base of Game Pass as well. I do think maybe Pac is being a little conservative with his estimate of 3 million people. Now, I have a caveat there. I don't know that those people will stick. I think that they'll get more than a 3 million person bump for Game Pass at the end of the year when Black Ops 6 launches day and date on Game Pass. But I also think that a lot of people are going to sign up, play the campaign, don't really care about multiplayer, and they're going to drop it the next month. Or, with any luck on Microsoft's part, it releases something else around that time period. Now, Indiana Jones should be there at that point. Avowed should be there at that point. So you're looking at another, I don't know, I'm just guesstimating 40, 50 hours of play for some pretty big games that people are kind of excited about that'll be coming online around the same time as Black Ops 6. So I do think they'll add more. I think they'll add maybe 5 or 6 million more subscribers before the end of 2024. Now, again, though, if players get through that campaign, that Black Ops 6 campaign, they finish off Indiana Jones, which I'm guessing is going to be around 14 to 20 hours long based upon other games from Machine Games. And then you get to Avowed. I mean, that's an action RPG. Those are usually a little longer. That's probably going to be 20, 30 hours would be my guess. Once they get through those games, then what happens? I think that's the big X factor. Will it be sticky? I think a lot of that will depend on what kind of games are available besides those big three around that time to maybe convince people to stick around. So I think Pachter's being a little bit conservative, but again, he was only really accounting for Call of Duty Black Ops 6 on Game Pass. He wasn't accounting for all this other awesome stuff that we just saw in the Xbox showcase. So I think that's where we're looking, and then the question becomes, do they stick around, and then what happens next year? Because this is the test period here, 2024, of what people will do with Call of Duty. And once they've got Game Pass for Call of Duty, will that convince them to come back every year for a month around November, October to play the new Call of Duty and then drop again? Will we see games like Gears of War E-Day that come out late next year that'll kind of take the place of things like Avowed and Indiana Jones from this year to keep people hooked in. One thing I do think, though, is we're going to start seeing a much better cadence from Microsoft as far as big games coming to Game Pass. There really haven't been any. So I really don't feel like we have a good barometer on what Game Pass can do when Microsoft's full force of all its studios are producing games on a consistent basis and at a consistent clip. So I think there's still a lot of ambiguity, a lot of X factors around what's going to happen with Game Pass. The second half of your question, how long will it stick? I will say through next year. So if Call of Duty doesn't move the needle this year, or maybe it only adds 1 million or 2 new subscribers to Game Pass, and then they go through all next year with all these big games coming out. Fable, I forgot about that as well, supposed to come out next year. If it goes through all next year with all these big games coming out, and you get to Call of Duty again, and it doesn't add a bunch of people, then I think you're going to see Microsoft reconsider. And in all honesty, kind of the shame in all this is that Microsoft and Xbox were kind of clairvoyant and short-sighted at the same time. I mean, Game Pass intrinsically is clairvoyant. It's an idea that's innovative that probably no one else could have pulled off, but probably wouldn't have the guts to pull it off if they even had the money. So I give Microsoft credit and Xbox credit for having the guts to try to go through with Game Pass, but I do think, and ultimately, maybe it was short-sighted, because I think what we're seeing now is that Microsoft and Xbox could compete with PlayStation all on the old grounds, like best exclusive for best exclusive. I think Microsoft wins. So it's kind of ironic that, again, Game Pass is this innovative thing that also may end up being short-sighted, because Microsoft bought all these studios to create content for Game Pass, but in the process, it's created enough games that it could survive on the old exclusive game model. So I would guess if we get through the end of next year, things aren't looking up for Game Pass, that Microsoft may indeed revert and go back to that old model and say, okay, we tried to basically give away our first-party games to you guys for free. You didn't want it. You didn't take it. Now you're going to pay for them. And it might be more successful than the Game Pass strategy. Obviously, they would still keep Game Pass in addition to that new strategy. So I just think the next 12 months are crucial for Xbox Game Pass. Next up, we have a question from Derek D111. Hi Shane, what do you think about Ubisoft deleting a digital game that was already bought by players? I wonder if somewhere in the user agreement that we just scroll through, it states this game may be deleted at any time, because if something like that is not in there, then it's stealing. Of course, it will probably take another 10 years before the laws recognize it, but it is still a scummy thing to do. Well, Derek, I think what we found out at this point, and just so you know, if you're not familiar with what Derek's talking about, he's talking about a Ubisoft game called, I think it was The Crew, that it decided to take down. The game's like over 10 years old. I doubt anyone was playing it anymore, but it took the game down, and truth be told, people had paid for the game, and now they can no longer play it. Now, I do understand the principles behind this. There's something to be concerned about, because who cares about The Crew? But the concern is that maybe that starts happening for games that aren't 10 years old that people do still care about. So from that perspective, I can understand why you might be a little up in arms about this. But generally, I think what happened is it just didn't have the licensing and it didn't have the audience anymore. So you're right. Technically, some people paid for a game that they won't be able to play again, but they've had the opportunity to play that game for the last 5 years, and they didn't care, and they didn't. So I feel like the only people who are going to really raise a stink about this are people who are interested in like suing Ubisoft to maybe get money out of Ubisoft. And I don't think that group is very big. So I don't think much is going to come out of this, but I do understand sort of the bigger implications of this. And I agree with you. It's scummy and wrong. I think, where do you set the line? Is it 5 years after a game comes out? Is it 7 years? I think 10 years is perfect, honestly. Like, particularly for a multiplayer focused, like, racing game. I mean, 10 years is plenty of time for you to get your money's worth out of something that you bought. So I understand where you're coming from. I hope it's not a precedent that's being set here that expands into other publishers and other games and things like that. I don't think it will. In all honesty, I don't think that Ubisoft did anything too awful wrong in this particular case. Next up, we have a question from Bach B. I don't understand why video games have different rules than movies when it comes to licensing music. Why did Mafia 2's soundtrack have to be updated for the Steam version? Imagine going to a theater that shows old movies and finding out that the soundtrack is altered in one of Martin Scorsese's films. Okay, I obviously do not work in legal, although I did work with legal for a really long time in massive corporations. And I have a basic understanding how these contracts work and that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to give you my take on this based upon my limited knowledge of working with legal and lawyers around licensing. So here's the thing. When Mafia 2, the PC, the Steam version releases, that is technically a new version of the game. Now, when they signed the deals for that game and licensed the music from the music providers for that game, they sign a very specific contract. And my guess is Mafia 2, is that PS2 or PS3? Regardless, when they signed that contract, let's say it was a PS3 game, I can't quite remember. They signed it for PS3, Xbox 360, and maybe PC. I don't remember if it came out for PC at launch. But that was it at the time. And they signed those deals as those are the versions that are a part of that deal, and the pricing is altered based upon how many versions there are at that time. So if they did indeed license both PS3 and Xbox 360 and maybe PC back then, they may have only licensed it for 5 years. Maybe they looked at it like, you know what, this is mostly a single player game. Most people are going to get everything they need out of this in 5 years. Our data shows us that after 5 years, nobody buys these games anymore. So maybe Take-Two decided to get a little cheap and not sign a deal in perpetuity, which would allow them to use that music track forever. But again, that is tied to a very specific version of that. So that's kind of the caveat between games and film, is that you have one version of a film. And when they sign the deals for that one version of the film, they also tie in the Blu-ray rights, they tie in the streaming rights, they sign all that, and they generally sign it into perpetuity. And it's just, there's just that one version of the film that gets distributed out. Well, you make changes to code, you update things with video games. If you put out another version of that game 8 years later, that is considered a new version and something that you would need to sign a new contract for. So that is kind of the basis of my take on this anyway, where I'm coming from as far as how I think this should probably be handled. Also, one thing that you could maybe point to here is that maybe this is a reason why some PC versions of games are not great, because a lot of times these deals are set for a time period, like 5 years. So maybe you're getting to that 5-year period, you haven't put out that PC version yet, you want to get it out so it still is under the blanket of that license agreement that you signed. Maybe the game isn't quite done yet, so you put it out anyway, so you get it out under the license, and then you just hope that the players are gracious enough to let you patch the game and fix the game as you go. That has been hit or miss on PC so far. We've seen it with so many console ports to PC. Some of them come out, they're half broken, people get pissed, they do their best to fix them. A lot of times they don't sell well, but it's probably still better to get that version out there under the old licensing agreement that you already signed years ago. Now, TV shows, they are a little bit more like games. And in fact, the way their soundtracks are handled are like games. So there's tons and tons of TV shows that are old from the 80s and 90s, and then they end up appearing on Netflix. And if you're a big fan of those shows, you will notice that a lot of the licensed music in those shows is eventually taken out for those versions that appear on streaming services. Maybe there's some big hit that was around at the time when the show was originally released, but they didn't sign the license in perpetuity for that show, so they end up putting like a fake song in there instead. They try to find a sound-alike on whatever music service that they use, and they have a license for that unlicensed song, basically, and they just swap that in there, and that's how they do it. And that's kind of what you're seeing with a lot of games. Like, one anomaly for video games, though, is Grand Theft Auto. Look at those 3 remasters, whatever the hell they were, that just recently came out for the first few Grand Theft Auto games. They still have all the soundtracks in there. Now, there have been a few songs that have been taken out of Grand Theft Auto throughout the years, but when you think about the total number of tracks in those games, that some of those games haven't been touched at all. And that is because Take-Two went the extra mile to pay the extra money to sign those licenses in perpetuity. And if you notice, Take-Two even put out soundtracks for those games. So that just shows you how different the licensing was there. And again, Take-Two paid more money for that. So a lot of it just depends on your budget, what you're willing to spend, looking down the road. What will we do if they decide to, kill our soundtrack? Having plans in place to handle that, all that stuff matters. It's sticky, but it's not as complicated as you think. A lot of it really is just publishers being cheap. They don't want to pay for that license in perpetuity. So once the license expired, they just do the best that they can. And one other thing I would add too is that composed music is immune. So when you hire a composer to compose a soundtrack for your film, or to provide the soundtrack for your TV show, or to provide the soundtrack for your video game, original music that you create just for the game, that is protected. So There's basically what happens is, at least in California where a lot of games are made, is you generally sign like a deal memorandum when you start working for a company. And what that deal memorandum says, and a lot of people don't read it, is that anything that you create while being employed by that company becomes the property of that company. I literally just had this conversation with Marcus Beer like a few days ago. We were talking about his show, Annoyed Gamer, that used to be on Game Trailers. Well, IGN bought the rights for all Game Trailers content from Defy. So Defy got it for free from MTV for some worthless stock. Basically, they just gave it away to Defy. And then Defy managed to sell that to IGN for real money. So IGN owns all the rights to like Invisible Walls, all of our reviews that we did, all of our shows, including Annoyed Gamer. And I was talking to Marcus, and he's like, no. I didn't sign anything. It's like, yes, you did, Marcus. Like, everybody who ever went on camera signed the same deal. I still have the deal on my hard drive right here that was signed. And basically what it says is like, anything you do while you're getting paid for us becomes our property, meaning that anything Marcus did for Annoyed Gamer was property of Game Trailers / MTV, and when that stuff was sold to Defy, the rights went to Defy. And when Defy sold it to IGN, the rights went to IGN. So technically, IGN now owns Annoyed Gamer, it owns Invisible Walls, it owns thousands of hours of me on camera that it can make money off of, and that's how those deals work. Next up, we have a question from Fried X100. The cost and time it takes to create AAA games is making them less and less profitable, resulting in more ongoing games as a service. Our generation is basically being left behind, and I imagine a future where we are no longer marketed to. If the big budget AAA game market disappears, would it really be all that bad? We all have backlogs going back decades. Even you, someone who plays games for a living, could go back and finish all the games you started. Fried X100, it is hard to imagine a world where there aren't at least some new big budget games coming out. The creators are going to want to create those. They're going to want to push to create those types of games. And if a publisher says, hey, we're not doing that anymore, they will probably try to find another publisher that is, and they will work there instead. Now, granted, there will be plenty of people, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of the millennials, Gen Z, all those younger generations than our generation, those people might be okay working on games as a service because they like them. I mean, that's what they play. And that's what's really delineating us from the younger generations, is that they're all about Fortnite and we're all about The Last of Us. Like, that's really kind of the difference. But I do think that there are developers out there that want to make single-player, big-budget games. And as long as that is true, there are going to be people making big-budget games. Now, let me just dream for a minute of what it would be like if there weren't, and all there were is games as a service. Now, I do play some games as a service. I'm not just organically against them or hate them. I'm picky. You know, someone who's been playing games for a long time, you tend to get a little bit picky with what you spend your time playing. And I am. But I do play games as a service, and I play a lot of them. But at the same time, I still prefer big-budget, AAA video games. That's what, if I had to choose between the two, that's what I'd choose. No surprise. I think you guys probably have figured that out by now about me. But however, I am still open to playing those games as a service. So I don't want them to go completely away either. And look, you say that, like, there's these backlogs and you can go back and finish games or play. I don't really like playing old games that much anymore. That's why, for me, Game Pass doesn't hold that much of a sway. I'm always looking forward to the next thing, the better thing. A lot of the games that I have not finished, I've played them already for like 30 or 40 hours and just haven't made it to the last 5. It used to really drive me crazy, knowing in the back of my mind that there's all these games that I'm right on the cusp of finishing. I've started to kind of get over that at this point, honestly. It doesn't bother me like it used to, that I have dangling threads out there, because I would rather play the new stuff, the new ideas, the new concepts, how things are evolving, things are changing. So I would not be happy if I just had to go back and play all my old games or finish off my backlog and stuff like that. Like, the other thing, too, is that games have become so complicated. Going back and, like, starting a game over after you haven't played it for, like, a couple years, it's like there's your save and you load it up. Like, this just happened to me with Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I went and booted it up. I'm like, I know I only have like 2 hours to finish this game, and there's this crazy, insane platforming section that I had stopped at because it was hard, and I had tried it a bunch of times, and I couldn't get past it, and I just got frustrated. Here came the next week, and I had to play something else, and I just left it. I went back. I'm like, I know I have like an hour left. It's like the hardest part of the game I'm trying to get through. I tried that section like 3 or 4 times, and I'm like, I'm not in the groove of playing this anymore. I'm like, that's it. And I'll never finish it. So it doesn't bother me that much. I also don't care that much about going back and playing my backlog. I know that's a thing. for like hardcore gamers online, their backlog. I don't care. Like, I just want to keep playing the new and best stuff. So I would be pretty bummed if they stopped making new big budget AAA games. I guess that's where I'll leave it. Okay, our last question for this episode comes from the one and only Commander Fett. What kind of concerts do you enjoy? Do you like to dance at them? Or are you more the type to sit and enjoy the music? Okay, first of all, I will say I enjoy all kinds of concerts. I like going to see my favorite bands when it's just them in a warm-up band that plays before them. I like going to festivals where there's like 8 different stages and there's like 80 different bands, and every day you have to like map out like, well, we're going to go to this stage at noon and this stage at 2 p.m. and this stage at 2:30, and I like doing that. It's fun. It's like a little puzzle you have to put together. So I love festivals. I also love electronic music. So I love raves. I love going to clubs and hearing DJs play. And to answer your question, yes, I dance at all of them. Rock shows, hardcore shows, I'm in the pit. DJs, I'm dancing in front of the speakers. Yes, I dance my ass off. I dance until I'm a sweaty mess, drenched in sweat. And again, it doesn't matter what genre of music it is, that's me. In fact, one of my favorite bands had been like broken up for like 20 years, and they finally played a show here in LA, and I went there, and it was supposed to be a sit-down show, and I literally refused to sit down. Some jerk behind me was like yelling at me, like telling me to sit down, and I wouldn't sit down. I'm like, no, I waited to see this band for 20 years. I'm going to see this band the way I want to see them. And so eventually the usher came in, and he's like, look, I get it, man. He's like, I would be pissed off too if somebody told me to sit down at a concert, but he's like, it's you and everybody else. He's like, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you over to this special spot where you can stand up and enjoy your favorite band, and you're not going to bother anybody else. And I was like, cool. So he did that. He got me up and took me over, and as soon as everybody saw that, like 50 people sitting behind me all got up and went over there with me, because I wasn't the only one who was like, this is ridiculous, having to sit down for a frickin' rock show. So to answer your question, yes, and I'm also adamant about being able to stand up and dance. I don't go to concerts to sit on my ass. Like, I like to be around with the people, going to the bar, getting drink. Like, it's a whole thing. So I love all genres. I love all concerts. I love all live music. I dance my ass off. Don't get in my way. All right, that's it for this episode of Ask Shane Anything. A big thanks again to all of you guys who are pledging at that Ask Shane tier or higher. We really appreciate it, and because of that, this show keeps happening. Again, we need questions from you guys to do this show. It's a good thing I'm not doing it every week. I wouldn't have enough questions. Now, I'll say this. I hooked you guys up today. I did 5 questions in this episode. I don't think I've ever done that in Ask Shane. But that's because some of the questions I knew I could answer a little more quickly than usual. But we need questions. So again, go to sifted.net. There's a link in the top at the header there. Go to our forums. Ask me some questions. This show will be back before you know it. Thanks again for all your support. We'll see you for Game Face on Tuesday.